Hello and welcome to the Choralosophy Podcast, a weekly podcast whose mission is multifaceted. Each week when you tune in, you will find episodes that question best practices, challenge music education dogma, facilitate conversations about touchy topics, demonstrate pedagogies, and conversations where colleagues learn from each other. This is episode 276, Your Program Depends on the Beginners, with Bruce Rockwell. It can be so tempting for ensemble music directors to fall into a kind of tunnel vision where all roads lead to and start with the top group or our most advanced ensemble. After all, they are often the ones who are able to showcase the culmination of what our program can do, of what our teaching can do. But this must not be done at the expense of the beginner experience. In this episode, Bruce Rockwell returns to discuss the challenges and strategies of teaching beginning-level high school and middle school choirs. Now, this in some ways is a sequel to his first appearance on the show, which was episode 195, where we talked about the importance of elementary school choirs, which are nowhere near common enough in the United States or in most of the world for education, where we discuss the critical importance here of the elementary school. Here in this episode, Bruce shares his insights on the importance of creating a positive choral culture and the need for differentiation in instruction to accommodate diverse student backgrounds. He emphasizes the value of concurrent enrollment, where advanced students can bring a friend and mentor beginners, fostering a supportive learning environment. The conversation also touches on the unique challenges of teaching boys in choir with changing voices, particularly those who have trouble matching pitch, and the strategies Bruce employs to address these issues. Additionally, we discuss effective repertoire selection and the importance of viewing the training choir as a vital part of the program rather than just a stepping stone to advanced groups. You're not going to want to miss this one. I think a lot of you who are music educators in the audience are going to find a lot of value because we're probably in the same boat. Are you subscribed yet to the free blog version of the Choralosophy podcast brand? It can be found at Substack, choralosophy.substack.com. You'll find blog versions of some of the episodes. You'll find blogs that are just standalone, some by me, but also some by guest contributors like Chris Maunu, Odell Ziegler, and more. You'll also find a show newsletter that is free there. It recaps all of our recent episodes and provides direct links so you'll never miss a beat. So make sure you head over there and subscribe today for free, or if you're feeling spicy, upgrade to a paid subscription. Choir directors, music educators, show planners, you pour your heart into your music. Shouldn't your events get the same attention? That's where Ludus comes in. Sell tickets, promote your concerts, and fundraise with ease. Selling merchandise and concessions? Ludus Retail makes in-person sales effortless. Running choir camps or workshops? They have a classes feature that keeps registration simple, and when you need help, the live support team is ready to pop up with real answers from real people. The best part? It's completely free for organizations. Thousands of music programs already trust Ludus because great music deserves more than just a ticketing system. Whether you've newly discovered the show or you're a longtime listener, I would like to encourage you to become a paid subscriber either on Patreon or Substack. Each works as a way for you to financially support this show and has different pros and cons, but in both subscription locations, you'll have access to my Google Drive, behind-the-scenes episodes, a direct line of communication to me that I will prioritize, and more importantly, it makes sure that I can keep doing this show forever. Those supporters are the reason that I'm able to do this show as a job and sustain it and treat it like a content generation machine for your benefit. So I would encourage you to head over there to either patreon.com/choralosophy or choralosophy.substack.com and become a paid subscriber today. A big shout out goes to the producers and Inner Circle over at the Patreon page. These are folks that are really dedicated to keeping the lights on here at this show. Venture Studios, Chandler Smith, Brian Long, Michael Herron, Kyle Peterson, Steve and Kathy Kakachik, David Kowalczyk, Max Jackson, Angie Schilling, Rebecca Chalk, RJ McCracken, Michael Shimp, and Kyle Siddons. All right, everybody. I am here with Bruce Rockwell. Bruce has been on the show before. Episode 195, we talked about elementary school choirs and in some cases the lack of them that cause us in secondary school choirs to have some consternation about the training that we're going to do. And so in a lot of ways, this is a sequel to that conversation because we will get a lot as high school and middle school choir teachers, we will get training choirs. We will get beginning level choirs of kids maybe who haven't ever sung in a choir before, or maybe if they did, it was in an elementary school for once a week, 30 minutes before school, and they were singing along with songs that they knew already on a track, and you know, the things that we're that we're doing in high school choirs is something very different. So, Bruce, welcome back. And just remind folks where you teach, and I'll direct them back to 195 to learn more about you.
Okay, thank you. And I'm glad to be back. I teach at College Park High School, which is in the East Bay, California, San Francisco Bay region. And I've been there for about 16 years now. And before that, I taught at the San Francisco Conservatory pre-college division and a couple of private schools. I taught at the San Francisco Waldorf schools and in various capacities. Yeah, and so that's me in a nutshell. I also compose, and in fact, that's what I got my master's in. So I kind of came at this through composition. So I had all the long learning curve of how to become an educator, choral educator. Sure. So I didn't have any of the training other than a long experience of being a choral musician and writing for choirs. But I didn't have, so a lot of this stuff I had to come by myself. But I also found out that, well, if I had gone the university route, I wouldn't have necessarily gotten this information anyway, right? And we've talked about this a lot, where a lot of our teacher candidates just aren't prepared with this information. Their professors don't really, there's my dog Zelda. They don't know because they never had to do it themselves, right? And this is something that we all have, we all have that beginner choir. And there's a lot of challenges that we all face, very similar challenges. And it really is like a box of chocolates. You never know what you're going to get. There's so much diversity of situations that we find that we have to deal with. But I think we all, in high school, we all have that choir. We all have at least one training choir, which then moves the students through the system into maybe higher level choirs. If we only have one choir, then that's our choir. That's the one choir for everybody. And so whatever our situation is, we have that choir. So, and we all are hungry for this information about how to teach it, how to get a good choral culture happening, how to get leadership happening, literacy, theory, classroom management, the repertoire. I mean, when was the last time you ever saw a university class teach a repertoire class about the repertoire that we teach?
Repertoire for kids who have literally never held up a piece of music into their hand before is a completely different type of thing than what most choral lit courses teach.
Exactly.
In universities. And, I like to tell the story. Actually, I don't know that I've ever told the story on the podcast before, but in real life, I like to tell the story of one of the first choirs that I ever stood in front of as a young teacher when I was 22 years old. It was a high school choir, but it was a completely beginner choir. They had never used sheet music. Their previous teacher in middle school had not used sheet music really at all. It was just the entire thing was by rote. And I passed out a piece of music, and I looked around and I saw about 5 kids looking at it like upside down, like they were turning it around, looking at the sideways. They didn't even know how to hold it, let alone sing what's on it. And I take your point, which is that like a lot of college professors, it's not a shade on them. It's just that they've never been asked to do anything other than lead the music, but that assumes that the people doing the music already have been taught how to do the music. And that's where we come in, like those of us who teach quote unquote in the trenches, so to speak, where with beginners and all of that. You've got some, we're going to kind of follow some notes that you made out here to make sure that like we're going to get to a bunch of really helpful topics to folks, I think, tonight, where if we're thinking about what it means for a group to be beginning level, we kind of already shared that, like what truly entry level, maybe they've sung before, but maybe they don't have the skills, or maybe they've never been trained in a formal setting. What are some of the challenges that you see year after year with your beginning groups that you wish that more of us had tools for?
Well, first of all, dealing with the differentiation, the need to differentiate, the need to meet them where they are, and the vast difference in where they're coming from, their prior knowledge, their skill level, their literacy, socioeconomics. It's just a big, diverse bunch. And yet we have to deliver one experience, but there are ways that I've kind of developed to differentiate and to meet them not only where they are in terms of their prior knowledge, but also their preferred pace or their optimal pace of learning. So that's the one big challenge that I think we all face, because we're not getting a homogeneous group of our level 1 students that have had a kind of a reliable sequence of instruction through elementary school and middle school. I think there are some systems in some communities where that is in place, and that'd be awesome. But the vast majority of us, I think, are really looking at a very mixed bag of what our students are in this type of.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, and I want to highlight something. You did hint at this earlier, but I want to highlight it for folks that we do. I think you would agree with me that we both acknowledge that there are some teachers or colleagues that we have that do just have the one choir. They don't have the luxury of a training choir, and then once you've learned all these certain things, then you can move into this next group. And I really do think it's okay for us to say, it's ideal when we have those situations, because our math colleagues do. Our math colleagues don't have to teach calculus and algebra all in the same room to the same group of kids. They teach it sequentially, where they learn, well, once you understand the principles of certain algebraic concepts, then you're ready for the next level of math. And so in a lot of ways, you could make the argument that what we're talking about here is the perfect world type scenario where we do have a beginning level group that can learn some of those skills to be met where they are. But then even within that scenario, they've been met where they are, but it's still diverse. Like there's the kid who took the piano lessons. There's the kid who played in orchestra for 2 years, 5 years ago or whatever, but they still have more building blocks than maybe a kid who just is walking off the street with no music training at all. And we have to figure out how to make it meaningful for them, but not bore the other kids who are ahead. And so it's a challenging scenario either way. Does that seem fair?
Exactly. Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
And again, that assumes that we are accepting all comers at this level, right? We are a place where everybody can join and start from ground zero. And I think this discussion includes some situations where, maybe we do have a strong feeder school, but maybe the other school doesn't have a choir, right? So we're getting freshmen that are all over the place. It's just more the rule than the exception. So I think there's that. I think we all face the problem of the non-pitch matchers that we deal with in this choir, and I think that throws a lot of educators because they don't know how to deal with it. They don't have the tools, and they don't know what's causing it. But I think if you know what's causing it, then that can really help how you approach it. That's a common, I think we have to definitely touch on that. So another common challenge that we all face is culture. How do one thing that I noticed when I was a few years in was that my choirs, our students in my upper choir, I had 2 back then, they were bought in, they really had a much better attitude, a better work ethic. And then I had my beginning level choir, and they didn't. And they didn't really have a way there was no role modeling for them in this choir. And I think that's the challenge. And I think maybe the first thing that I would like to talk about is your ensemble structure, because I think this doesn't get much airplay. We don't talk about this a lot. And I think it's kind of like when there's the old saying that when the amateur goes to the war, they want to talk about battle strategy. But when a professional goes to war, they want to talk about logistics, right? They want to know how they're going to supply the troops, how they're going to, get the food in there. This is what a professional deals with. And I think that along those lines, I think we really need to look at our ensemble structure that our beginning choirs fit within, to see if that structure is maybe serving the experience well, or are we in effect prioritizing the upper groups at the expense of the training choir? So, and I give you just a couple examples of how I see this happening.
Yes, please.
Some schools have freshman choirs, right? That's their beginning level experience. And so the freshmen it's kind of like Lord of the Flies, when like everybody has the maturity level of a freshman, and they don't ever get a chance to see or really come in contact with the upper classmen or the leaders. If you have a leadership, structure within your program, they don't get a chance to become acculturated into a positive culture for the choral culture. They're sort of sequestered, they're sort of quarantined, until they get the freshman stink off of them or something. And then they're allowed to graduate up into the other choirs, which is where they want to go, So that's, I think, one problematic thing is when we relegate the freshman year to the beginning experience and vice versa. Another problem that I see quite a lot is, frankly, what I inherited myself. I had two choirs, and they were both mixed. And so I had a beginning level mixed, and then I had an upper level mixed, which was at the time auditioned. And I just thought, well, okay, that makes total sense. I have two choirs. I got to make one beginning. I got to make one advance. And I think that it took me a number of years before I realized that structure was really holding me back. And it was, again, making it difficult for the students in the beginning choir to really become part of the positive choral culture, because all of my advanced students with the better training and the better singers were in the upper choir, and that's where they wanted to be. And it was causing a problem with my efforts in recruiting students from around campus, because when you have that situation, your juniors and seniors who love choir and they've had a wonderful experience, they want to bring their friends in, but they don't want to bring their friends into, their friends don't want to come into a freshman choir or a choir that's totally dominated by freshmen, right?
And then their friends aren't in it.
People, right?
Yeah.
And so there's no experience where they can sing with their friends. They want to sing with their friends. They don't want to sing with a bunch of freshmen that they don't know. So it wasn't until I kind of broke that structure that I started to get lots of first-time choir students around the campus, because either they finally had room in their schedule for it, or they heard great stuff through the years for their friends and they finally wanted to give it a try. Or before I changed the structure, I just wouldn't see them, right? So and then you have another problem, is that if you're prioritizing the upper choir because you want your upper SATB group to bring home all the accolades from festivals, and you want them to really be the group that shines, you're probably going to be pulling up all of your freshman boys who can match pitch into that choir because of balance problems, right? So it's lots of problems that happen. I think that if you're going to have two choirs, one of them really has to be a treble choir. How you do that, and how you differentiate, and how you can come up with premium experiences, and how students can level up. They can level up in that system. But I really think that your lower level choir or your training choir needs to be something that isn't necessarily less than, right? I think that's an important concept.
All right. So I agree with you mostly. However, I do think that, so let me start with the points that I agree with. I agree with the idea that there needs to be ways to allow interaction with and learning from upperclassmen with younger students right from the very beginning of the program, so that you are creating, well, I like to think of it as like sports teams do, where they might hold a practice together with the varsity and the freshmen because they're culture building, and that they are working together on, in this football program or in this baseball program XYZ, and there is a certain culture building that's very natural in that environment. And I think choirs, bands, orchestras, any group benefits from that. I just would suggest that you don't have to do that through integrating classes by level. That's
Sure.
just that, but because there are lots of other ways to do that. And so let me give you now kind of my experience with what we do. So we definitely have beginner level classes, we have intermediate level classes, and we have advanced classes. The way that I get around that problem is by very intentionally creating experiences from the very beginning of the school year where those upperclassmen are singing together, collaborating with, teaching those younger kids. Ensemble trips can be more than just a performance. They can build community, inspire artistry, and give students a reason to stay invested. That's why I recommend Kaleidoscope Adventures. For more than 30 years, Kaleidoscope has helped student groups travel with purpose, combining performance opportunities with experiences that deepen musical understanding and create lifelong memories. They'll help you find the right destination, the right venue, and the right balance of music, education, and fun. And they manage the planning from start to finish so you can focus on your job as an educator. To explore options for your choir, visit mykatrip.com or find the link in the show notes. One of the things we do is we have this kind of like, they call it advisory period, where kids can go to different classes and get extra help from teachers. And sometimes we might have like a tenors and basses sectional, but during that time, but it's all tenors and basses. It's beginning and advanced, and we're going to have rehearsals together because later in October we're going to have a concert together where the older kids sing with the younger kids, and so building those opportunities in. So there are other ways to do that, but I did want to highlight that as a big point of agreement. So now my curiosity though is, since you said you've had success with kind of breaking down some of those barriers, because I have seen that other problem of I've got upperclassmen who want to bring a friend and they want to do it, but then they don't know the skills to be in the upper level group. And then they don't want to do it because they don't want to be in the beginning group because now their friend that brought them is not there. So how do you get around the issue of, and now you're in this group, but you don't know as much as everybody else does? So how do you differentiate for that kid?
The way I've tried to get around that is that I really promote the idea of concurrent enrollment. So some of the students who are in my upper choir, my chamber singers, and these can be like my all-state kids, they take my level 1 mixed choir, which is my concert choir. They take that because it's kind of like more fun. It's a different niche, right? The emphasis is more on the fun learning. I mean, it's still rigorous, and they still read all the time and everything, right? They can't get around that with me, and they know that. But it's just more fun. There might be some more social team building stuff that we do in there, and it's less intense in terms of the repertoire and the concert preparation. So I get a lot of students who are in more than one choir, and I think that's really helpful to have them in the training choir as the section leaders, as the role models. And we do the other things that you mentioned too. We get together, we have the combined pieces, and a lot of opportunities, and ice cream social, where it's pure, it's just about getting everybody together and getting them to know one another. And so we do all of that, but I find a lot of value in having my more advanced students in this training choir. They're just, the role, you can't get around the importance of role modeling, I think. And
I would love that.
Yeah.
I would love it if my upperclassmen would take the beginning level class. It's just like, it's nearly impossible for us with the way our schedule and our building works.
Yeah.
Getting them to stay in one choir is a feat of engineering to keep it all 4 years with their schedules. And so I do occasionally get a kid to do, like the beginning level class again, just for fun, because they need a credit their senior year or whatever, but it's not very regular, at least in our program. So I was also thinking about another thing that I do because of that balance problem that you said. And of course, folks who listen to my pedagogy type episodes and my sight reading episodes know that my pedagogy is very sequential. And so it would be very difficult to jump into my program at the top level, having skipped all of those things. And so what I do, and I want to know what you think about this with your scenario, is in order to keep the balance in my most advanced SATB, I have to bring in 10th grade boys. We don't have to bring in any 9th grade boys, but we do bring 10th grade boys into that group. And so what I do is I actually grade them differently. I almost treat it like a class within a class. So their expectation of academically what they need to achieve during that class to get an A, quote unquote, is the same as the 10th grade girls who are in a different, like they're in a second year choir class, which because we don't have enough boys, we can't make a second year boys choir class. I would love it if we could, but we don't. And so we put the boys in the advanced group, and then we just grade them in the same way that the girls are being graded at their age level. And so it keeps it a little bit more fair. And that way they can be in the upper level group, but they're not being held academically to the same standard, which also is, interestingly, one of your points too, of like differentiating between the group expectation and the individual expectation. Say it's for sight reading or for vocal development or whatever. So do you find yourself having to do those types of differentiation when you bring in these beginners to a more advanced group?
Well, I don't bring in beginners to a more advanced group, right? Like, so in my case, My advanced mixed group is a chamber singers group. It's an honors class. So in California, you can't have an honors class that has ninth graders. So
Oh,
I don't even allow them. I couldn't, and I wouldn't if because again, I don't want to compromise the experience in the training choir for the sake of better balance in my upper choir. I don't want to make those decisions. I mean, we all have to, but it's just you have to be aware of the trade-offs, I think. And so if I took all my freshman boys who were like musical theater kids and the stronger singers and the ones who came from a good choir in middle school, if I took them all in the upper group, they wouldn't be in the training choir. So that so all my good voices are out of the training choir. So that just kind of lowers the level of the music. And again, these are the kids who are sort of they're the ones with the passion I'd be taking them out of my training choir. So I just try not to do that. And I so anyway so there's this discussion, and I think that everybody's situation is different in this, right? I would just like people to think about the pros and cons of the different models and realize how their ensemble model and the flow of who goes into what choir, how that impacts the training choir, and hopefully the training choir isn't just viewed as sort of like the farm league that you get it's like the claw in Toy Story. I'm going to take this guy and bring him up over here. That we try to have some good voices in there too, as well as the real beginners. So
yeah.
It's just kind of
And I think it's also important. Part of that, the solution there too, is structure, as you said, thinking about the structure, and I agree with that's a good idea to be reflective of that. But also part of that solution, I think, is just in the pedagogy itself. It's how do you teach the kids what culture, like you said before, what culture do you instill? You can absolutely create a culture where your beginning training choir doesn't feel like a stepchild. Where they don't feel part of it is how we present it to them. Like, what is this choir for? And what is it that we're trying to do in this group? And I think having the various groups on your campus, whether it's 2 or 3 or 7 in my case, each group has its own identity, like its own special reason for being that people would want to be a part of. It has its own contribution to make to the program. And I think if you can pull that off, then a lot of these other problems are less. Thoughts about that?
Yeah, and I think that could really encapsulate the issue, that if there should be an esprit de corps and the students should be proud of what that choir does. And they're rather than feeling like it's the sucky choir that they can't wait to get into one of the good choirs, So and there are probably many, many, many decisions that go into that, and the decisions that we make really tell the students, I think it sends a message, right? So,
for sure.
Anyhow, so I think that's kind of an important thing, and it may or may not be something that people can really change. So, we can maybe start talking about some of the other things about like pedagogy, and I know you and I have a very similar take on literacy. I think that we have to approach our training choirs differently, and I know you've got a great series on the first days of school, but there's also the first days of school that are particular to your choir with beginners, right? So how you introduce the literacy concepts, the solfege, the hand signs, and in my case, takadimi.
Yep.
And you get them reading their first pieces, their first simple rounds that they can sing with their rudimentary skills. So there's the literacy topic, which is huge, and obviously you do a lot of podcasts about it. But I think that's one that has some unique conversations when you're talking about a choir with a lot of different level kids in it, and a lot of kids who have never read music before, and a lot of guys who haven't sung since their voice changed. So in your case then, how do you approach literacy from, how is that different for your beginning choir? How is that different than all the others?
Well, So, I mean, the place obviously I'll give a short overview of that. And of course, on the show, I've got a very deep dive on
Sure.
exactly what I do
Sure.
week by week of the entire ninth grade year for our beginners. But it is essentially no different in my mind. It's not different. It's just that we're starting in a different place. And that's where the sequential part for me comes in. Where that's why I love that I have beginning, intermediate, and advanced, because I can start without having to assume that kids know anything. Even though I do, obviously I do have some kids that come out of a more robust middle school experience, and then some kids that have none at all, and then some kids that come from band, and then some kids that come from orchestra, and then
Yep.
some kids who come off the street, like I said before, and have never done music before. And so I just start at the beginning. Like I start at the very beginning. I define every symbol, and we talk about what a quarter note is. We talk about what a half note is. We talk about what they sound like, and then I attach takadimi to it. And this is all within the first few days of school, where I'm doing the stepping back and forth and teaching, okay, divide the beat by one. We call that ta, and then ta, ta. And we build those auditory blocks from the very, very beginning. And then basically the way I approach it is that each week I'm gonna simply give them one more little thing, like one more little level of complexity, one more exception to a rule, one more, you know, it's almost like I'm just turning the volume knob up a little bit at a time. And suddenly I show them, in November, I show them the Sight Reading Factory level 1 that we did on the first day of school. And we're now doing, 3-part level 5. And they go, we did that? That was all we could do on the first
Yeah.
day? And so that's kind of how I think of it. Or another way I like to describe it is that I'm dangling a carrot out in front of them, and it's my job to know how, too far they would give up, but if it's too close, they'll just gobble it up and also give up. And so I have to figure out where exactly does that carrot need to be. So that's kind of how I think about it. How about you?
Well, the way I think of it is I don't let them learn a different way. Like I teach them the solfege, and I kind of I just normalize that as the way in to music. And so they don't know any other way, right? They don't know. They're vaguely aware, sometimes I'll give them rehearsal tracks or whatever on special need situations, but they're not asking me for that, because they're used to, I teach them how to mark solfege into their repertoire in the first week. I have this series of worksheets that I came up with to show them how to do that. So they're marking solfege, and they're checking it with their section leader to make sure it's correct. And we're using the solfege skills. Sometimes sure I correct them on the piano or whatever, or if it's a tricky rhythm, we'll do that by rote. But basically they're using their skills, and so they don't know that there's any other way. So it's just kind of what is normal for my students, and I think that. Sure, it's different for the beginners, especially for the ones who have pitch matching challenges, and that's a little bit of a different thing. But I just think that for me, the literacy part is just what we do.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And of course, I agree. Not all of our colleagues do. And as I'm sure you're aware, that this is not like a ubiquitous thing necessarily, that the solfege is the way to access the music, or we're gonna create like a preferential way of doing it in the class. And of course, the reason I have no patience for the argument, really, because kids take a long time to learn how to get good at anything. So whatever we choose as our method in our class, you kind of have to do it every day.
Yeah.
You got to do it every single day, whatever it is. Did you know that you can get discounts by entering Choralosophy at checkout at a variety of amazing music education related vendors? Well, now you do. You can enter that code to get discounts at mymusicfolders.com, at sightreadingfactory.com, at 3minutetheory.com, and when you get sheet music at graphitepublishing.com and endeavormusicpublishing.com. And so if we're going to teach kids to read music, you can't just do it on Wednesdays.
Right. And you can't just do it for that 5-minute sight reading example after warm-ups. You know what I mean? And that's kind of how I did it at first, because that's all I knew how to do. We'd use solfege a little bit in warm-ups, and then we'd go do the sight reading example, and we try to work through that. But then then I would start teaching the music, and I'd be plunking out their parts and, singing back and forth and call and response. And it was rote. It was all rote. And I think in that environment, they really resisted because they get frustrated because they don't have the payback yet. It's like a foreign language. If your students are sitting in a classroom and only speaking a foreign language just a little tiny bit every day, they're gonna go 4 years and not speak the language and never become fluent, right? You kind of need to immerse them. So it wasn't until I started teaching all of the repertoire on solfege. It wasn't until that the light bulb started to go off, and then my students started really embracing it, and then they really enjoyed it, and then they took an interest. They sit up when we do sight reading, off the board in class, and then they embrace the work that at home on their sight reading factory assignments because they know the payback. They get to experience the payback because they've been immersed in it. And if you're frittering around the edges of it and teaching them a little bit of it, but not throughout your entire rehearsal process, it's just gonna be frustrating for them, and you're always gonna have so there always going to be some resistance about it,
Right.
So
yeah, it's interesting. You said you said that eventually your students they started embracing it and enjoying it. That's definitely the experience that I had 2 years ago when I started doing this, because just like you, I started doing it the old way. I'll call it the old way.
Yep.
The way most of us in our generation were raised in a choir, which is
autopilot way. Yeah.
The sit at the piano and sit in your chair and wait for somebody to play it for you on the piano, and or the choir teacher to sing it for you, and then you sing it back. And that was how I was raised. I like to tell people about my accompanist when I was in high school. Her fingers were bloody at the end of every day, and that is not a joke. She had to wrap her fingers in Band-Aids because she was playing so many notes so hard all the time, because if she didn't play them, we couldn't sing them. Right. And so I discovered this too, and now my kids are so proficient with everything, and they're so fluent and independent with all these skills, that when they go to honor choirs, like all districts and all states, they get frustrated because they're waiting for all these high-level musicians to have their notes played for them, and I don't want to do stuff like that. It's so slow. And what's ironic about that is that many of our colleagues think that they're speeding things up by playing everything for everyone or singing it for everyone, and it's faster at first.
Yeah,
and
it is.
It's a law of diminishing returns. Like once you get over teach that first few easy songs, you also are teaching them that this hard solfege stuff that we're learning right now is irrelevant, because we're gonna learn this easy song real fast over here by rote, and then they don't want to invest as much time. So you really have to invest in the time at the beginning of the year to make it relevant.
Right. And to be fair, giving the part recordings gets you student-led sectionals and student-centered learning, which is, a substantial benefit. But yeah, you're making it possible for them to get through your program without developing the skill.
Right.
And so it is even in that sense, even when you're thinking about it in those terms, it's a trade-off, right? You're trading off their development for faster concert prep or whatever the need might be. So
let's talk about boys. Let's talk about boys and pitch bend. Let's talk about boys and pitch bend. So
let's talk about boys versus the girls too, because I think
go ahead.
The way we deal with trebles in a beginning choir, like if it's a mixed choir, and that's also another decision. Is it better to separate the genders, so to speak, in a beginning situation, or is it better to have a mixed choir? In my case, it's mixed, and there are pros and cons about both models. But so in my case, the trebles, the sopranos and altos, you can't really voice them right in the beginning of the year, because they're not accessing their singing range. The ones who don't have a lot of experience, they're just not accessing it. So if you try to voice them by their vocal range or their vocal tone, their timbre, you're going to end up with a lot of altos who have good training and they can sing in their head voice. You're going to put them in the sopranos, right? So you're going to get all of your strong singers in the soprano section and all your weaker singers in the alto section, right? Which is exactly what you don't want. And because you need the good ears in the alto section, and so for my trebles, what I do is I assign them alphabetically in the beginning of the year. I, just go A through whatever it is going to be sopranos for the fall concert, and the rest are going to be altos. And then after that, for the winter concert, they switch. Yep. And hopefully then by January, they're singing more. They're singing more in their natural singing range. They're accessing more of their head voice. And at that point, for festival season, I would voice them. I would take the time to get them in the right section. But until then, I want everyone to be singing soprano parts so that they can maybe sing a little bit of the higher range. I want everybody to sing some of the alto literature so that they can start singing and hearing into the texture and singing harmonies. And we're not going to do any kind of repertoire that it matters, right? None of the repertoire that we would do in a choir like this would be something that would be out of their range. And seriously, like 80% of all the trebles that we would get really in high school are kind of indistinguishable between soprano 2 and alto 1, right? They're interchangeable, and only a minority of our singers are true soprano 1s, coloraturas or whatever, or contraltos, where they couldn't really do either one. So I just mix them up, the trebles, and it's almost exactly opposite of how you have to deal with the guys, right? Because it's
critical where they end up with the guys.
Yeah, and this is, I always say that it's, the beginning choirs are like a box of chocolates, and there's no other section that's more box of chocolatey than the guys, right? Because they're all over the map. We've got, we'll have changelings, we'll have true tenors, we'll have, musical theater baritones, will have basses that have just dropped way down into the basement and they're not accessing their head voice. They're just all over the map. So oftentimes they can't sing a baritone part. A baritone arrangement, SAB, might be better in terms of the musicianship needed to hear a 3-part texture, but the part is going to be too high for some of the guys from the low basses. They're not going to be able to hit those notes, right? So, and I think the bass section is really where we have all of the pitch matching. Well, not all, but the vast majority of the pitch matching, the low droning pitch matching. And I think that if we were to, let me put it this way. If you've been in this profession more than a few years, you know that there is a certain profile of the non-pitch matcher, the low droning non-pitch matcher. And I'll say, exactly what it is. These are boys whose voices have changed and they didn't sing through their voice change. So, and that is like 80 to 90%. That takes care of
90% of them. Yeah.
And I've had, in my years, I've dealt with, probably about 50 of them who came in not being able to match the pitch that was played or sung or whatever. I think I've had 2 girls who had a similar type of problem, and those got addressed pretty quickly. They figured
it's really just the size of the instrument.
It's the size of the instrument.
But they've got more margin for error. There's more muscles to coordinate, all that.
Well, and also, I think the way we teach and our whole profession and the way the music is structured is sort of biased towards the higher voice types. And the way we teach is kind of, the default is the treble register. So if we were going to play something on the piano to demonstrate a melody, are we going to use our left hand? No, we're going to use our right hand, and it's going to be in the soprano range. Right? We would almost never demonstrate like around. We would never think to demonstrate it in the range of the basses, right? With our left hand. Mm-hmm. And so the basses, not only do they have a bigger problem because their instrument has dropped the lowest on them, they're also displacing the octave all the time. And so things, and also our warm-ups, when we do warm-ups, typically, a lot of directors will start on C, right? They'll start on C and then go up, right? Mm-hmm. And they'll go up, and oftentimes it'll be it'll be a warm up that encompasses an octave, right? Or even a major ninth or 10th, or, like and it'll be way out of the range of these kids who are struggling down low. And so they don't get much work in that narrow band of pitches where they can sing and where they can reliably kind of match the pitch, right? So
and one of the things one of my pet peeves too is that they don't actually, most boys that we call non-pitch matchers are really they just can't match that pitch that you're doing. Like they almost always have 2 or 3 or 4 notes that they can successfully match. It's just that teachers in general are not trained to find those notes for each individual kid. And it's one of the other reasons that I love Sight Reading Factory, because when I find out that little Tommy, whose voice just dropped an octave, can sing an A flat, a B flat, and a C at the bottom of the bass clef, which is actually pretty typical, they can sing those 3 notes. Well, then I can make an exercise for him that only has those notes, and then he can be taught that he can successfully, correctly sing the exercise instead of just going, oh, well, he's close enough because he's having trouble matching pitch.
Right. And then you bump up the next pitch, and then the next pitch, and then the next pitch. And so I was told early on that to deal with this situation, you should train them on falsetto, and they should sing high and drop and bring that down. And I tried that, and sometimes it worked a little bit, but and I think it does help to work on sirens and to work through falsetto maybe a little bit. I think that can help, but I find it more helpful to work with them on in that low band of pitches where they're successful, and just work on that a lot, and then just kind of gradually move them up through the weeks, through the beginning weeks of the year, just sort of gradually work on that. And when I do that, I always make sure, if I'm playing at the piano and we're doing warm-ups and I'm doing them at the piano, I'm making sure I'm doing it in their octave with my left hand, right? And so I would recommend for female teachers, if you're demonstrating something, I would recommend not trying to match their pitch, right? But match, like if they're going to hit a note that's down in their chest register, you got to sing it down in their chest register. If you're asking them to sing a note up in their head voice, you should sing it up in the head voice, right? So that they get a intuitive sense of the mechanics of the energy that it's going to take, right? And I think that trying to match their pitch, if they're trying to hit a higher note and you're singing it down in your chest voice as a woman, that's going to give them the wrong kinesthetic sense of what that is. So kind of keep that octave displacement, but I would suggest playing it then in the left hand on the piano as you're singing, so that they have some kind of reference that's in their range. I think that could be very helpful.
Another one that's a revolutionary that I've recently been clued into and got kind of converted to is having the boys, the 9th grade boys in particular, that's where this issue is mostly for me, is having them sing along with cello drones. Like, because on YouTube you can just get any pitch, and it's an overtone rich sound. So it basically is, you get one D natural, but it's on a cello when played vigorously. You're hearing all the overtone series too, and it's a great way for them to just, as they're reading, can you check back in? Have you changed? Has your do changed? Now you can hear it, and it forces them to very gradually be coordinating those muscles. Every time they want to go flat, it kind of like it's pulling them back, and I love that trick. So if anyone has not tried that, that's a good one.
Yes.
Okay, so Bruce, we've got time for one more topic here, and I say we do repertoire.
Okay,
I say we
absolutely.
talk about repertoire.
Yeah.
So what are your thought processes for, like, you're picking a song for the beginning group, for the training group? How do you think about how much VC? How do you make those decisions?
Well, I start with rounds, first of all, and very simple things just in the first days. And I have my own list of pieces that I know are going to work in those opening days no matter what, right? There are times when I need to hear the group before I really want to choose their repertoire that they're going to be singing in concerts later on. But then, there's that time in that, like, maybe that first month where they're singing stuff that they're not necessarily going to be singing in concerts. So I have my own basket of goods for what works for that, right? These early success pieces. But it just sort of depends. Sometimes I do use SAB stuff if the if it's going to work, if it's going to work with the guys, right? If their situation, because you really have to get in there pretty early on and assess what's happening with the guys, right? Or I'll sometimes use SATB, so it just kind of depends on where their voices are at. And then there's a whole list of great repertoire pieces that I think would be useful for any educator to know. These pieces that are particularly bulletproof and useful and successful to hook new into choral singing. And I think it might be good to compile a list of those, and maybe I'll offer that to your listeners, because I know I've seen one of your lists of that sort. I've got my own pieces, and we tend to see a lot of the same pieces recommended on social media, so these are the pieces that are really going to work for you, that don't have problematic range issues. There are arrangers who really do know the territory.
Right. Now there is a list in my Patreon drive, but it hasn't been added to in a long time, and so it definitely needs to have some stuff added to in there, because you're right. The tried and true kind of concept of the basic pieces that we need for the beginners. I think that's not necessarily a bad thing that they are the same ones a lot, because they're tried and true for a reason, which is that they just kind of tick all the boxes of things that kids will enjoy singing. And the other thing too, I think about this topic that a lot, where they're tried and true for us because we're choir nerds and we do it for a living, but they're all new to the kids.
Right.
So I think we become sensitive as professionals that we're like, am I really being creative enough with this programming? What will my colleagues think about all the song? Like, because I do the same song every 4 years or whatever. But the kids, if we're truly being student centered, they don't care.
Yeah,
like
they don't. In fact, they love repeating repertoire. The returning students, they love that, and I think repeating repertoire is probably one of our most underappreciated and underutilized superpowers.
Yeah, sure. You can overdo it.
You can, certainly. But it'd be hard to overdo it. Like within reason, you're going to program new stuff, right? You're going to, and it would be hard to really overdo that. But I also think that 2-part repertoire is wonderful, and I think that there is this. We talk about sort of the autopilot decision making. There seems to be a default towards SATB, right? We want our groups to be singing more SATB stuff, because that's where the canon is, and that's probably our own personal frame of reference. It's what we sang in college, and so I don't think that we should necessarily always prefer that for those reasons. We need to find what works for our singers who we have in front of us that particular year. It's got to fit the group, right? It's got to fit the group. And I think some of the pieces are always recommended because they're reliable. There's something about some of these arrangements that students always love, and students are successful with. So I have no qualms about playing it very, very safe with the beginning groups. I don't want to win any awards for creative programming, not with this choir. Maybe I might want to impress some adjudunators with one of the advanced choirs. I don't bring my training choirs to adjudicate festivals, by the way. And unless your state or your local area actually has a good experience for them, like for instance CMEA in California, they don't really have a category for this type of choir that we've been discussing. Their level 1 is intended for middle schools, and then they have a level 2 that's intended for intermediate high school, and level 3 is for advanced high school. So there is really no experience that works for them. And so year after year, my students were just kind of frustrated with that, and I stopped bringing them to that experience, and it kind of was the right thing.
Yeah.
But anyhow, I mean, yeah, this thing about programming, I think 2-part. I think we don't use enough 2-part stuff. I mean, I'll program 2-part music for my advanced choirs if it's the right piece, and unison, velvet shoes. I mean, there's unison singing is just a wonderful tool, particularly for our training choirs. And
absolutely,
we don't use it that much.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I know for me, the most common mistake, programming pitfall, so to speak, whatever you want to call it, for me is just out kicking my coverage, over programming, thinking that we're going to get to something that, and then there's five, I guess you probably don't have to deal with 10 snow days over the course of, the month of January and February, where you suddenly have lost two whole weeks of rehearsal. And every year that happens to me, it doesn't happen every year here, but that happened to us last year. And then I look back and I go, why did I pick these hardest songs? I know where I live. We should have, I did this to us. Like this is my fault. We could have been ready on simpler things or less total music, so that we have time to teach the other fundamental things. So that's kind of my big pitfall. Let's finish with you giving one. Like, so what are some of your pitfalls or things that you try to avoid for yourself, or advice that you would give? Like, don't make this mistake.
Well, I would have to echo that. I mean, isn't that the number one pitfall that we all
I guess it probably
because
is.
we're ambitious people, and we have high standards for our students, and we want them to overcome challenges. But we just have to we have to maybe have one piece that challenges them, one piece out of the set, right? And when you have less music and it's not this hamster wheel of concert prep, then that's when you have time to really work on the good stuff that the students enjoy. The kind of the social moments, the little social breaks that we can take, and take time for the purely recreational and social experiences, and it kind of makes choir a family. It makes it a community and not just a class. So, but I mean, I think that I've just learned so much over the years, and my focus has really been on how to make the beginning choir better. And I guess if I were to answer your question with something more original for me, is that I don't look at my beginning choirs as a sort of fodder or the farm league for my upper choirs. I look at it as the most important thing that I do, because it is that sort of y'all-come structure where it's a 9 through 12, and I do have, a small core of more advanced students that I'm able to have co-enroll in it that are also in my advanced classes. I just think that the big y'all-come choir has to be the most important thing you do. You have to look at that as the priority. Make that right. If you make that right, then you get your kids. You got them for the rest of their time.
And the upper level groups will be better too, as a result.
Absolutely.
Yep.
But if you make decisions that are always sort of taken away from that, taking all the good singers out, taking all the boys especially out, so that the balance of trebles to bass singers. I mean, if you're making lots of decisions that prioritize your upper choirs, it's going to hurt that. But that to me is maybe the message to end with for this podcast, is to make it the foundation of what you do. Make it the most important thing, and lavish most of all the love that you have for the upper choirs in what they're doing in terms of artistry. Have that for your lower level choirs in terms of their improvement. How much they're learning in your program, and what they're getting out.
Yeah. Well, Bruce, I think that's really well said, and I appreciate your time, and thanks for bantering back and forth some ideas and some wisdom. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Very important topic, and I appreciate you having me on.
Thank you so much for sticking around to the end of a conversation. If you are still hearing my voice, that means you're one of the MVPs, one of the diehards, one of the real ones, as the kids say. So if you are willing on the way out to check out a few different ways that you can help me continue to make this show high quality. One, use the promo code. That's the biggest one. At Sight Reading Factory, at mymusicfolders.com, at mychoirropes.com, at graphitepublishing.com, and endeavormusicpublishing.com. All of those take the Choralosophy checkout code, and of course now the newest one is 3-Minute Theory. You can get a 15% discount when you enter Choralosophy at checkout there. And of course, going to Apple Podcasts and leaving a positive review is very helpful there, and sharing the episodes to your colleagues in real life and on social media. All of those things are incredibly helpful and allow me to continue to create this resource for you. Thank you so much for tuning in. We'll see you next time.